Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where and when you are. And welcome to another Festival in a Box session. I'm not sure whether this will be the first one you taste or perhaps you're further into the box, but I hope you're enjoying it so far. Today, and for this session, I'm delighted to say we've got another good friend of mine in the Whiskey Lounges. We've got Paul Dempsey from Spey Distillers, or Speyside Distillers. And he's going to talk to us about the Spey Fumare Cask Strength Batch 2. So give me a moment, I shall bring Paul in just the new. Paul, how are you doing?
Morning, Eddie. Great stuff. How are you?
You've revealed that it's morning here.
maybe, like you said, depends when you're watching this
Well,
back.
exactly,
But
exactly. No, it's no problem. I don't think anyone will mind. So, how are you doing?
hello.
How's sunny Glasgow?
It's not bad today actually. We had this kind of storm a couple of days ago, but we should be used to that by now in Scotland. So um,
Yeah, but
not too cold.
we had the two back to back, didn't we? So
hmm
it's been a bit severe. Hopefully, over the next few weeks, it'll calm down a little bit.
Yeah, my drive back from Whiskey Lounge was interesting.
The York Festival.
Yeah, yeah, it
Yeah.
was. It was great, and I'm glad I went to York. The drive back was, maybe I should have got a hotel. So
Well, you should have, because we had a very good night out after that,
I know I missed
which
that.
uh,
Next
which
time,
which you would have only contributed to and made it even more memorable.
well, definitely next time. I need to check the weather reports in advance. So
Well, we're recording this, Paul, so I will hold you to that. Anyway, listen, obviously the viewers at home can tell that we know each other, but they may not know whether me or you. So
Mhm.
I suppose I should say I'm the founder of the Whiskey Lounge. I've been doing this for a while. Paul, tell us about yourself.
I'm Paul. I work for Speyside Distillers. We produce the Spey single malt range distilleries based in Kingussie, which is up near Aviemore, very far south of the Speyside region. It's not a big distillery, not too well known. We've been running the distillery, owning and operating it since 2012, but the distillery is only 30 years old itself. Um, Probably see us more if you visit whiskey fairs or whiskey shops. And we sell around the world now, but we produce kind of small batches of we hope really good single malt, so different styles.
Great. Sorry, that was a bit shorter than I expected.
I talk too
uh,
much sometimes, so let's see.
You're not used to having so much time to talk. Great. Well, tell us a bit about the whiskey that you're presenting today, the Spey Fumare Cask Strength.
Right, the whiskey we've got today is a little bit unusual for our distillery, and it's this one here. I've got my bottle freshly opened. We have a whiskey in our standard range, which is a peated one. Now, we don't do a lot of peated whiskey. We have this one, Spey Fumare. It's at 46%. We launched it a few years ago. Great success. We only produce with peated barley for a couple of weeks each year. But one of the things we did for, I think it was the Spirit of Speyside Festival a few years ago, was a single cask of it, of this peated whiskey. And the feedback was excellent. So that has led to the dram that you've got in the pack here. Every year we do a batch of 1,500 bottles of some of our range, and this is the peated one. You have batch 2. It's a refilled bourbon, peated barley, bottled at 60.4% ABV. You can tell we're new at this because by bottling at 60.4, we ruled out being able to sell it in places like Scandinavia, where they have a 60% limit on ABV, which is great. That's more for the rest of us. But this is batch 2, where we've just released or recently released batch 3. But this was my favorite. We did the first batch back in 2019. This batch arrived during lockdown. And yeah, it's a great. It's not meant to for people that love the kind of Islay whiskies. It's going to be different. For folk that have maybe not tried too much peated whiskey before, I think this is good. It's softer. We're using Highland peat rather than Island peat, so hopefully you get more of the smoke and less of the kind of medicinal notes that some folks say associate with smoky whiskies.
So yes, that's an interesting differential to point out, is the fact that you guys, and certainly many of the other mainland distilleries, when they're peating their whiskies, they'll use malted barley that has been peated using mainland peat rather than Islay peat, for example. And there is quite a significant difference between the two. What I mean, you kind of hinted at the differences. Are you able to tell us at all where the peat comes from for the malting?
Yeah, well, I mean, we source our barley from Crisp Maltings at Port Gordon, which is northeast of Scotland, the kind of Aberdeen, Kincardineshire area. We have a very light new make spirit anyway. Distilleries, we have a long fermentation time, makes the new make very sweet and floral, and we think that works better than we think using the peated barley from the northeast of Scotland works a lot better than if we were to use a sort of more powerfully peated barley from maybe one of the coastal maltings or whatever. So, but it complements, and you said it yourself. There's lots of distilleries in the Speyside region have a peated one in the range. They're all different and they're all worth trying. So,
yeah, well, I think it's just made the single malt landscape that little bit more interesting, hasn't it? And it kind of challenges people's perceptions that only the Islay has this kind of monopoly on smoky whiskies, which it has done perhaps in the past, but these days you can get peated whiskies from pretty much anywhere.
Well, the Islay ones are justifiably legendary. I mean, I remember my first trip to Islay, which was probably about 2004, and standing on the seawall outside Bowmore in one of those sort of storms where the rain's horizontal and it's just battering in your face, and you get all that kind of, the temperature, the salty air, it all works really well. But the things that are going on in other parts of Scotland with peated barley, smoky whiskies, and then you start combining them, there's some amazing kind of cask work going on, especially with some of these new distilleries. And it's really interesting. It's so much more varied than I think it used to be kind of 20 years ago, when there was almost kind of defined, a bit like the red wine and white wine thing, where smoky whiskey had to come from here, sweet whiskey had to come from somewhere else, and all that kind of stuff. I love the fact that it's all changed. So
yeah, and historically, obviously, particularly during the war years, where the smokeless fuel was requisitioned for military use, and distillers all over Scotland had to switch back to using peat. So you obviously had that kind of peated tradition coming back into it. And obviously even before that, and before the advent of smokeless fuel, all distilleries in Scotland and Ireland would have had to use peat as the drying element for the malting process. So
yeah, some of those older distilleries, especially up in Speyside, we're one of the youngest distilleries in the region. But there's distilleries that have been up there for a couple of 100 years now. And back then they would have used local barley. They would have used what they found within, a couple of miles of the distillery as their fuel sources and all that. And a lot of the time that's those would have been, this is pre-single malt, but this would have been a peated spirit they were producing, but different levels and completely different from everywhere else.
Yeah.
The Highland region is huge. So, what Glengoyne would have been doing might have been completely different to what you would find, Glenturret or somebody further up northward. So,
yeah, it kind of scotches the whole regionality myth, doesn't it? Even more. Well, I tell you what, we should kind of get into tasting. We're 10 minutes in, and
Yes.
I haven't tried a dram yet. Yeah.
Well, here we go.
So we're gonna taste it, nose it without water first, or you adding
Yeah,
water?
I've been nosing this sneakily before we started,
Okay, well I'll do the same.
but I'd love to know what folk think. So, I mean, you can see from the color straight away. I said refill bourbon. It's really, really faint, really pale gold color. We've got casks in the warehouse that are brand new, and there's lots. I mean, even though it's not a big warehouse that we use, there's lots of experimentation with casks, and we just think that refill bourbon works better with our spirit. We have an unpeated whiskey in the range, which is the same casks. And I think maybe if we'd used first fill or even virgin oak, there would be too much tannins coming through in the final liquid. But on the nose, hopefully you get that kind of soft sweetness. So it's definitely not an Islay whiskey. Little bits of honey, perhaps. The smoke is definitely there, but it seems to be quite muted and soft to me. If you drop a couple of drops of water in, you can sometimes bring some more of that towards the front.
Yeah, I get apart from the hints of smoke, lovely sort of pear drops. Quite slightly citrusy as well.
The kind of boiled sweet thing is a tasting note we get across quite a few of our range. Pear drops is good. I never come away from one of these tastings without suddenly being hungry because of all the food stuff that get mentioned.
Well, I mean, one of the things that I always enjoy about the Spey Distillers bottlings is that you tend to veer away from this quite modern attachment to using lots of different kinds of oaks and well, not different kinds of oaks, but different kinds of second-hand casks. So, you know, port, sherry, etc. Using first fill or even fresh bourbon casks. And therefore, I tend to find it in your whiskies, they're very honest, they're very open. You taste the distillate character all the time, which, to my mind, in a few whiskies, modern whiskies, you sometimes lose that because they've been smothered by oak. And I never find that with Spey bottlings, which I think is a fantastic thing.
There's a little bit of sort of history to Spey that might have a contributor to that. And the chap who owns the distillery was essentially an indie bottler before he bought the distillery, and he's from the northeast of England, but he'd been living in Taiwan for years, and had been buying whiskey from various distilleries, shipping it out to Asia, primarily Taiwan. And he'd established that he was selling it under the Spey brand name. We were one of the distilleries he'd been sourcing casks from, but his family background, you can trace his lineage right the way back. He's connected to the Harvey distilling family, which in 8-9 generations ago founded Bruichladdich, and a few generations prior to that were involved in Yoker and some of the early distilleries. So he was putting whiskies together to cater towards a market that was fond of traditional old-fashioned whiskies. By buying the distillery, I think that let him bring some of that knowledge in, and Spey became a distillery bottling, but with little hints back to sort of a historic past that probably predates the distillery, actually. So that said, I would like to. I love being able to play with different casks. There's casks that are available to distillers now that were never available even when I started in the industry 20 odd years ago. You never heard of, some of the new distilleries then. Arran's a good example, where we're doing kind of cask finish work primarily because they had a younger whiskey that they were selling to stay going. Bruichladdich were doing it as well, and there was casks coming in from vineyards you'd never heard of, and grape types. And it's interesting. You could maybe go too far with some of the casks that are appearing now, but I love the fact that it's something new to try. And and our spirit actually lends itself quite well with that. We've done quite a lot with port, but we are still quite traditional on the sherry and bourbon front. So,
yeah, I think certainly maturation in quite diverse wine styles and types is it's very interesting, and quite often does work, but it often, I think, produces a spirit that perhaps doesn't taste like whiskey. At the very far end of it. And I think sometimes we lose sight of the flavour of whiskey as opposed to the flavour of that particular bottling. And I just think with you guys and one or two others, you tend to stick to the formula of, if it ain't broken, etc., etc. Notwithstanding experimentations with port casks and whatever else.
Well, we are actually, a lot of folk don't know this, but we were, when we took over the distillery in 2012, we did a lot of work with Jim Swan. Probably because he'd met the chap that owns our distillery in Taiwan, where Jim was working with Cavalan at the time, and Cavalan's now a superstar. But in this country, I think a lot of the Swan client base were these new distilleries that are all appearing in the last couple of years. So Lindors and McNean and Kilholman and all this. And a lot of his knowledge has come from years and years of background in the whiskey industry. Casks, STR casks, where you take the bourbon cask and you rechar and things like that. And a lot of those ideas, that's maybe where the sort of port cask thing comes in. But we got a lot of our sort of cask knowledge in the early days. He wrote all our first tasting notes and worked with us on those ranges. So a lot of that might come from that as well. But that may be why you saw we launched a port cask, as did Penderyn, as did Cavalan. We needed all the we got all this outside help when we started. So,
yeah, well, there's no harm in that. And being touched by Jim Swan as a distillery there's definitely no harm in that.
But
so obviously we're drinking this neat or with a few drops of water. Have you discovered any other ways of drinking? Now, is it Fumare, did you say?
Yeah, we call this one Fumare, which Latin word for smoke. If you've ever been to Italy on holiday, you'll see the Vietato Fumare signs and all over the hotels. No smoking. Still translates to a modern word. Some of do you know what, we've got a few whiskies that have got these Latin names attached to them. I think maybe because we have an owner that comes from Durham, and it's a fairly new distillery. We would struggle to get familiar with all these Gaelic terms that some of the distilleries up there we have been using for a lot longer than we have. So we decided to do something a little bit different.
Yeah. Why not? I feel a bit of a fool because I've been calling it Fumare all this time, but it's Fumare.
Well, I say Fumare, but we did a whiskey festival the weekend and it got called Fume. As long as you can pick it up and people know what it is, that's fine by us. We one of these days, I think, you'll see a book coming out perhaps that's I've already seen sort of phonetic descriptions of some of the whiskies, whiskey names. It took me years to figure out how to say Abendarrig and a few of these others. So it's part of the fun.
Yeah.
Once you've had a few drams, the pronunciation usually starts to flow anyway. So
exactly, everyone becomes an expert. So what I was going to ask was, Paul, have you tried this in any kind of mixed drink or anything like that? Is there anything you could maybe recommend to the viewers at home to try it with, if
I mean, obviously we are at 60% ABV, so this is a couple of things I would look at. Perhaps using your water dropper to find the sweet spot on your palate. Now we've got a 46% version of this as well. as well as the batch 2 limited edition one. And I love the fact with cask strength you can find the sweet spot that sits. But this is one of these ones that works as a little afternoon drink. You could perhaps make you could even go highball, because it's a very delicate spirit, even at this strength. We're in the wrong season for it, but summertime, kind of a smoky highball, and get it mixed in with some of the, find some nice kind of smoked meats, or even maybe, the kind of Spanish chorizos and all that kind of stuff. When you taste this one, the smoke isn't the first flavor that gets you. You mentioned some of the pear drop aromas earlier on. And again, this is another one where whiskey from our part of Scotland might differ from the islands, because we think that you get a lot of kind of sweetness and honey and kind of vanilla almost immediately, and the smoke then comes in as a second flavor. But with the cask strength one, the smoke then hangs around on the back of the palate for a long time. And I think because of the smoke on this whiskey, it works well as a pairing with kind of stronger flavored foods. Some of our unpeated ones definitely work with very kind of light fish, white meat, etc., white chocolate. This is where we start to play with the kind of heavier things. I watched MasterChef last night, and I'm thinking, oh yeah, this would work with some of the things that are being made. So
yes, I always get a bit of a thrill when I'm watching MasterChef and they include some whiskey in the recipe or something. I can't remember which one I was watching. I think it was actually an Australian MasterChef, which my good lady enjoys watching. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but the Australians seem to be obsessed with really long series. So I swear this thing took 6 months to finish. It was about 80 episodes. I was literally pulling my teeth out by the end. I remember there was one who included, it looked like Lagavulin actually, and they obviously used a bit too much of it because they absolutely ruined it.
You see, there was one a couple of weeks ago where they, because at the moment they're showing on the TV now it's like the professional one.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
So it's great when you see guys that are working in professional kitchens and they're struggling with things like omelets and whatnot. It gives me hope for my own home cooking.
Exactly.
But some of these guys are rocking up with kind of smokers, and they're smoking partridge and venison and everything in the kitchen. That's it. My smoke alarms would go bananas if I tried it. But you watch it and you're thinking, I wonder if we could actually try something like that up at the distillery. I grew up on the east coast of Scotland, so down near Anstruther, where you've got all the kind of fish merchants and the harbours. And if you go a little bit further north, you see the guys that are doing all the smoked fish right there on the harbour side. Maybe we should. I think the whiskey industry needs to do more with the kind of food. We're starting to see it now.
Yeah.
Food and whiskey pairings like the wine guys were doing 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And it's great. It brings a lot of fun and a lot of new potential.
Absolutely.
We never thought about using whiskey in cocktails before, and but whiskey's getting taken in different ways every country you go to. You go to Italy and everybody's drinking Glengoyne with soda water in the kind of summer highballs. Hot country, what's a treat?
Yeah.
Don't be scared to play with anything and change things around. So
yeah, exactly. I think if we were doing this 10, 15 years ago, we wouldn't be talking about cocktails, would we? We'd be turning our nose up at them. But you go to a bar nowadays and the highball is pretty much everywhere, isn't it? It's like,
and I don't know which company it is that did it first, but they're probably all bigger than we are. So I don't want to infringe on anybody's copyright. But is it Lefroy that did the smoky cokie, or
I think it
Lagavulin?
I think it was Lagavulin. I think it was actually our old friend Colin Dunn who
that may well have been the case.
Coined the term and then didn't receive the recognition. I think
he's probably got a secret royalty on that. I bet he does.
He should do.
But but that is just an absolutely, 20 years ago, the idea of putting Coke in your whiskey, there would have been some whiskey old dude at the end of the bar shouting at you for even contemplating putting a mixer in whiskey.
It would have been me, Paul.
Would it? You don't look old enough to have been sitting at the end of the bar 20 years ago, Eddie.
I would have done my best.
But and it's the most simple thing. It's just a really strong smoky whiskey, and it works really well.
Yeah.
And it attracts the attention of new people, brings more people towards whiskey.
Yeah.
Which we all need. There's a lot of new distilleries, and I hope we can find an audience. Something that Whiskey Lounge does very well is actually bringing people in and lets them, you can try all these things in one room.
Yeah. Well, I think the highball is great because it's kind of like, there's a few strands to it, isn't it? First of all, it's kind of like whiskey's G&T moment.
Mm-hmm.
Secondly, it's a refreshing drink, which you could substitute out for a beer. And thirdly, it's much less calorific than a beer.
That I actually didn't think of that. So I can have this. I could spin this as a health thing.
Well, that might be pushing it, but certainly, well, if you think it's very, I only just really thought about it. If you think about all the calories they go on about in beer, there's none of that in whiskey, and you're just adding soda water to it, aren't you? So
no, and it's gluten free. It's all the impurities are distilled out. There's never any additives.
Yeah.
Barley, I mean, essentially, it's just porridge is a good healthy breakfast, but if you distill it, you can make a whiskey. So
yeah. I think we probably should stop there as far as the health benefits go. So tell me, apart from a dram, what else floats your boat? What's your kind of favourite tipple outside of whiskey?
Oh, it's changed over the years, Eddie. When I think like most people in Scotland, you start on vodka once you're old enough to go to a bar. If it's spirits, I mean, beers are great. I live next door to a giant brewery up here. But I kind of agree more with the European aspect that beer doesn't really count. You can have beer any time of the day, as long as you don't drink too much of it. Yeah, starting on kind of vodka once you're old enough to go to bars in Scotland, and then you move on. And I kind of, if I'm not drinking whiskey, it's probably going to be rum or bourbon, definitely brown spirits. And I don't, probably because I still drink those as kind of spirits and mixers. I'm still getting used to gin. The kind of floral thing is something that's interesting, but I think a good rum and coke is just awesome. So.
Okay, I figured you to be beer, all about the beer, but like you say, it doesn't really count. It's more of a soft drink.
I live next door. The Tennant's Brewery, for anybody who knows Glasgow, the Tennant's Brewery is about a quarter mile away from me. So if the wind's blowing the right day, all you smell all day is beer being made, and it's nice. But if it's a chill out at home, it's usually a spirit and mixer. I'm not very good at making big cocktails, but simple and effective, good quality base spirits or good rum, good bourbon.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, well, lastly, Paul, just a question on the future of whiskey, be it mixed drinks, cocktails, or any other developments that you may have heard on the grapevine. Is there anything that you're excited about or even concerned about?
Not so much concerned. Well, the big concern is, how we all continue to get together. I do think the big thing for whiskey is education, which we're getting very, very good at. It's great to have festivals back on, and I think we'll see physical festivals and the virtual ones combining. The virtual festivals that we're doing here is great, but I would urge everybody that's doing these to also look at some of the Whiskey Lounge events, to get out and you can actually walk between producer to producer, and you can try different whiskies and talk to the people that are there, and there's always new things. Every time you do a festival of any description, the whiskey industry is releasing new releases all over, and it's worth trying. Don't be, you mentioned the sort of distillate or the regional lines blurring in Scotland earlier on, and don't go in with an open mind. Whiskey from the islands can be unpeated. Whiskey from the Highlands can be peated. Whiskey from France, from Switzerland, from Italy, from Japan can be awesome. And I would urge everybody to sort of try them whenever you get the chance. I love seeing the results of blind tastings. And I think we'll see more and more. The last time I was in Germany, they've got over 50 distilleries in Germany now. And some of them have been doing this for a few years. So you're starting to see them hitting into the export market. And I think it's really interesting because they have slightly different rules. They might be using different types of casks, things that maybe suit their work more than we would be using in Scotland. They're distilling in different temperature zones, like Cavalan and Paul John. And I just love that kind of variety. And I think, we're going to see more and more of this. There's lots of new distilleries in Scotland and the UK, actually. Lots of new distilleries in the UK in development or recently started. I think the last whiskey lounge we did, there was the Spirit of Yorkshire were there, and they've only just had their whiskies released in the last couple of years. And I'd love to see what's coming in from Tasmania, from the US, from Sweden. They're coming in from everywhere, and they've all got their own little unique elements. Obviously, I hope none of them are as nice as mine, but don't run away from any of these new ones just because they're from a place that you didn't realize whiskey came from. So
yeah. Well, I think that's kind of reflected in the Festival in a Box pack. The sheer number of whiskies from all over the world, and as you say, not just whiskies but good whiskies. Stuff that's really worth trying and notable. So I would totally agree with you that don't discount anything until you've tasted it. There's no substitute for tasting stuff. No,
absolutely. And the interesting thing is, when you see, as we all know, there's loads of these kind of judging events and awards everywhere. And when you see the results of some of these blind tasting panels, where even now the virtual ones where they might have been sent, a judge might have been sent a box of 30 drams, you see the results of some of those coming in. And, almost every single year, there are surprises that have come from new countries or new producers, or a younger whiskey has taken a big award that everybody thinks would have been, won by a 40-year-old Speyside. Or at the other end, you get own label whiskies from some of the supermarkets scoring much more highly than established producers. It's proof that this industry just keeps evolving, keeps getting interesting, and is always ready to throw curveballs, and that's where the fun is. So
yeah, absolutely. The fun aside from meeting up for a dram, that's the best bit, isn't it? And hopefully we can continue to do that. Hopefully the pandemic allows us to get through the rest of this year, beginning of next year, and then back into meeting up and having a dram together.
Yeah, well, we've had a few whiskey festivals now this year in the UK, and I know a few folk have managed to travel to some in other countries as well. So it's good. I mean, it's great that these are returning, and I say we combine the physical ones and the virtual ones, as long as we can always still sit and taste interesting drams, new drams, maybe from new distilleries. But it was great, and I know there's some festivals already announced for next year. We're already looking at a few. So if anybody that's watching this has tasted this one and really likes it, please, check out some of Eddie's events next year. There's festivals all over the country, and if you guys make it up to Scotland, look at the Spirit of Speyside Festival. It's when the distilleries will open their doors for everybody. It's usually at the end of April. We have been waiting to see everybody for a good couple of years now. So this is part of the myth, part of the legend of whiskey. This is what we like. It's one of those things that makes us more sociable. We want to see what people think of our whiskies when they're in front of you. So
there's definitely no substitute for going to see where it's made and talking to the people that make it. Anyway, listen, Paul, I think I've used up enough of your time this morning, but thanks so much for agreeing to appear and for providing your fine Fumare.
It makes me want to go for an Italian dinner now, I think. I don't know. I need to find a good restaurant nearby or whatever. So,
does the Tennant's Brewery not have a good restaurant?
Actually, there's a microbrewery in there called Drygate.
Oh, okay.
Which anybody that's a sort of beer nut would probably love. And they kind of built a kind of craft brewery in the yard, and it's really good. And over lockdown, you could actually get a delivery from them faster than you could get a delivery from Asda. So the essentials were there. So you could get beer delivered in about 3 hours, but it was taking you 2 weeks to get a supermarket slot.
Yeah. Presumably in the Glasgow area, though, not nationwide.
No. The little guy on the bike would have to pedal a fair bit to get it down as far as York, I think.
Well, we may test that one day. But anyway, Paul, listen, thanks so much again. And don't forget, guys, you can get the Fumare Cask strength from the Speyside website, which is there. If you missed it earlier on, you can go back and pause it. But there is a £15 discount exclusive to folks viewing this video along with their packs until, did you say it was the end of February?
It's valid up, I think, until the end of February. Thank you for listening in. I hope this one has gone down well with the folk that have got the pack. Drop us a line, get in touch, and let's see. There's other whiskies available as well. So see us at one of the Whiskey Lounge festivals next year, and we can try a few more. So
brilliant. Sounds good to me. Thanks so much, Paul, and have a good rest of your day. And look forward to catching up in real time at some point.
Cheers, Eddie. Have a great one. Have a great Christmas and New Year.
Cheers, Slanger Paul. Cheers.